is a special edition of Tuesday Night AMP because we're having an interview with the one and only Missy Sampson. Last week during Thursday Night AMP, we had Marty Bell on, and Missy Sampson joined us in Angry Marks chat room, and decided, hey, let's have an interview with Missy. And I believe she's joined me on the line right now. Missy?
Hi, Sierra. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm doing okay. You have to bear with me if you hear me coughing. I have a little bit of a cold.
Oh, I feel you. I'm getting sick myself, honey.
That's what being on a roof in the middle of a hurricane will do for you.
Oh, Lord, you was out on the roof?
My sister's roof started to blow off Monday night in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, so I went over to her house and tried to jump up and nail the part that had sheared off back down in the middle of the rain and the wind, and so almost killed myself in the process. Luckily, other than some bruises and this nasty cold I have, I'm all good.
Wow. Where are you located at up there where Sandy was?
I live in a suburb just north of Philadelphia.
I live down here in Virginia. The most we got was just rain and high winds.
Count yourself lucky, because it's nasty up here. I mean, Pennsylvania made it out. There were a lot of problems in Pennsylvania, don't get me wrong, but, compared to what, I've seen in the news and pictures of friends, in Jersey and New York, I think we made out okay. I don't have to wait an hour to get gas like some of my friends in Jersey do, so I consider myself lucky.
Yeah, thank God you came out okay, because a lot of people are still suffering through the effects of Hurricane Sandy. If you don't know about Missy Sampson, she is the current World Professional Wrestling World Heavyweight Champion. And Missy, I just got to watch one of your matches against Hybrid back in September.
You watched the hardcore match. Yeah, that was my last title defense.
Yeah, I'm not really too much into hardcore wrestling, but my God.
That makes two of us. That makes two of us.
Yeah, it was the funniest part of the match is, I think it was when you got to stick with the barbed wire out, and that lady was like, oh my God, like, she was not ready for that.
Yeah.
And then you gave him a body slam onto thumbtacks, and I was just like, oh, dear Jesus.
All fair game. He poured them in the ring. That was his own fault. He put them in the ring.
Hey, you get what you deserve, right?
Exactly.
I want to start off about your, tell us about your background. How did you get started into wrestling?
Well, I always watched it as a kid. I grew up in a single-parent household. My parents divorced when I was 4. I have 3 older sisters, and we were raised by my dad. We saw my mom on the weekends, but we were primarily raised by my dad, who owned his own business. So there wasn't a lot of, quality one-on-one time with my dad growing up because he was always at work. But he loved wrestling, and he would always watch wrestling. So, I think I kind of learned at a young age, I could just sit here and watch this with my dad. This is time we could spend together. So I used to just, jump on the couch with him, watch it when I was a kid, and I fell in love with it. And ironically, it was the cause of some of our most heated arguments as a child. But so, I got into it from that aspect, watching it. And then, obviously as you get older, you don't spend so much time with your dad. And I didn't, but I always still watched wrestling, and I was in love with wrestling. And when I was 16, our house burnt down in a house fire. And it was just at the end of the school year, so it was during the summer, and we ended up having to move into an apartment. The insurance company moved us into an apartment 20 minutes away from where my house was. So I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have my own car, so it's not like I could drive anywhere. So I was kind of stuck in this apartment for the summer. And I was flipping channels one day, and I was just flipping really fast, and something caught my eye, and I changed back, and here's this, gorgeous guy standing and I could tell he was in a wrestling ring, but it wasn't a WWE ring. Back then, I didn't even know that indie wrestling existed. I thought it was WWE or WCW. That was it. And so I was like, what is this? So I started watching it, and here, the guy that caught my eye was Tommy Dreamer. It was before he was the narrator of violence, and it was when he was still doing the gimmick with the bow tie and the suspenders. And it was ECW. And I started watching it regularly, and found out that, it's filmed in Philadelphia. And I happened to mention it to one of my older sisters, who was 2 years older than me at the time. And she said, oh, yeah, I know all about that. You know, Leah, who was a girl we went to school with, goes to those shows all the time. She knows a bunch of those guys. And I said, oh, well, if you see her, let her know that I want to go. And my sister's like, yeah, whatever. Well, my sister never ended up running into her, but I want to say like 2 weeks after we had this conversation, me and my mom were in the mall at the food court getting something to eat, and who happens to walk up? Now, I hadn't seen Leah in over a year. Leah walks up. She's like, hey, what's going on? So I brought it up to her, and she's like, oh, yeah, it's in Philly. They have shows like all the time. Like, just let me know, da-da-da-da. And I was living with my mom at the time, and my mom was like, yeah, you guys can go. Like, not a big deal, whatever. And she told me when the next show was down at the arena, and inadvertently, sometime between my mom agreeing to go and the next show, I ended up moving back in with my dad. And my dad would say I could go, and then he would find like a reason 2 days before the show to ground me so I couldn't go. And it was so funny because at the time she had told Tommy Dreamer that, like, you know, I was a huge fan of his, blah, blah, blah. So, like, she'd go to the show and come home with, like, an autographed picture of Tommy for me. Or, like, I still have, he wrote on the back of, like, a guest check at a diner a note to me, like, hey, sorry we missed you again. Like, can't wait to meet you, Tommy Dreamer, which I just thought was beyond crazy. So, you know, I ended up moving back in with my mom, ended up getting to go. My first show was Lulu Temple in Plymouth Meeting. Get to go. The very first wrestler I ever met in my whole life was Too Cold Scorpio, who I absolutely adore. Nicest guy, you know, and I just started going to ECW shows. Mm-hmm. There was a girl at the time in ECW called Virgin Princess Angel. Her real name is Angel Amoroso. Anybody who remembers the old ECW opening will remember there's a vignette part of Hack Myers caning a brunette in a white wedding dress. That was Angel. Leah got booked, although she had never been trained. Angel used to run her own Fed in Philly. Leah got booked on the show in Philly and invited me to go down with her. So me and my mom drove her down, did the show, and then after the show, everybody goes to eat. And we're all sitting there eating, and Angel's sitting across from us. And my mom happens to mention that, you know, I've always wanted to wrestle. And at the time, you know, you're talking like 96. So there weren't, you know, as huge as women's wrestling is now, it wasn't that big at all back then. Yeah. There weren't that many women wrestlers. So Angel said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. She said, I'll train you for free just so I have somebody else I can take to shows and work. I was like, awesome. So we started training at some little rundown gym we all called Hawkins in Philly. It was a two-bay garage. One bay had this broken down ring in it we were constantly having to fix before we could train, and the other one always had a broken down car they were working on in it. You know, trained there for a while. Went to do my first match way before I was ever ready for it, for Dino Santa and Triple WA. And Dino called me 2 days before the show and said, Angel said you and her are coming to work the show, and now Angel says she's not doing it. Are you still coming? And I didn't know anything about it. I was like, what? I was like, no, I can't. Like, so he conned me into it. So I go to do it. Ends up being 30 seconds of nothing that I end up having to do. Books me for the next show. I go. I was supposed to wrestle Heidi Lee Morgan. Some of you may remember Heidi from the WWE in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. The week before that, Heidi had broken her back in the match. She couldn't wrestle. I ended up having to wrestle Little Jeannie. The match was beyond horrible. Like, horrible. Me and Jeannie laugh about it now. And it was horrible. But Heidi came in the locker room and said, look, you know, I can see that you really have a passion for what you're doing. And at the time, Angel had kind of moved away. I wasn't really training with her anymore. She said, look, my parents have a ring in a building behind their house. You know, it's in Jersey. If you can get there, I'll train with you. So I used to go like 2, sometimes 3 times a week, take 2 buses and a train to Jersey to train for 8 hours with Heidi Lee Morgan. Did that for a while. Was working more shows. You know, that's kind of how I started.
Yeah. You mentioned about Angel Amoroso, and is she still active? Because last time I heard of her, she was working as Violent A.
She's not, to my knowledge, she's not still active. I haven't seen her probably in over 10 years.
Yeah, because the last time I seen her is when she first started working for Juggalo Championship Wrestling, and that was maybe some years ago. And wow, your background is really old school. Especially your training, where you're getting, you know, stretched by Angel first, and then you went to Heidi Lee Morgan, and you was working her for hours and stuff. And you know,
and it wasn't even Angel. Like,
Mhm.
when we would go down to this Jim Hawkins, there were, like, me and Angel were the only girls in there.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, like, Angel would show me a bunch of the basics,
Mhm.
but I would have to get in there and train with the guys. And, you know, the guys that were training down there at the time were, like, Trent Acid, Nick Burke, Flex Wheeler. Like, I mean, there were a bunch of guys down, O-Dog, Joker trained down there a little bit. So, you know, so for the most part, it wasn't that I was getting stretched out by Angel. I was getting beat up by the guys.
Oof. So that's really old school because I think a lot of people don't realize, especially in the early 90s, even though you had some women wrestlers around, it wasn't, women's wrestling didn't really come to that big boom until the late 90s. And the early 90s, it was still kind of, you know, you had your like little women promotions with the tape matches and stuff like that, but it wasn't really a big scene on the independent scene as wise. That's like when you mentioned the gym where you guys had to fix it every time. That's really old school because
Yep.
most of the girls started out training with the guys, and for years, if you weren't trained by Fabulous Moolah and you wanted to get into business, oh my God, you had a tough luck getting in.
Well, it's funny you say that because shortly after I started training, I actually got to meet Mola. And talk about the sweetest woman ever, because I had heard that too. Like, if you were a girl and you weren't trained by Mola, like, you had a hard road to go.
Yeah.
Kind of like she kind of had a vice grip on the women. But I met her at an Eddie Gilbert memorial convention in New Jersey from a owner by the name of Dennis Carluzzo. Went there, Mola and Mae Young were there. And one of the guys that helped run the company actually said, "Come on, I'm going to introduce you to Mola." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, come on." So, and at the time, Mola used to run an all-women's convention in Las Vegas and then one up in Connecticut, I think, every year.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy takes me over and he introduces me to Mola. He says, "You know, Mola says, you know, Missy's wrestling. You know, she's been training with Angel in Philly, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Oh, man, like, it's going to be no good." And quite contrary, Mola was the sweetest woman, and she said to me, she's like, "You know, it's nice to meet you, da-da-da," you know, and she was the one that told me about these women's conventions that she does. And she said, "Look, you know, I understand you probably can't get to Vegas." She's like, "You know, the card for Connecticut is already booked, but I always have a women's battle royal. If you can get to the show, I'll put you in the battle royal." And I was like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, if you can just get there." And unfortunately, I never got there. I could, at the time I didn't have a car, so I couldn't get there. But I was blown away just meeting her, how sweet she was. And, you know, the first thing she did was say, "Oh, you're a wrestler? Oh, well, look, I have this show, and the card's already booked. If you want a spot in the Battle Royal, I'm more than happy to give it to you." Like, she was just wonderful.
Yeah. You know, there's always been conflicting reports over her over the years. Either girls that were trained by her or worked with her not liking her, or some people saying the total opposite of "she's so sweet." You know, no one really knows unless you came into contact with her. And you also went by Luscious Lily. What was that? Your first name?
No, it wasn't my first name. The very first show I ever did anything on, I managed for New Jack City Wrestling in New Jersey. And I get to the show and I get dressed up and I'd never thought of a name. So they're like, "What do we call you?" And it's like literally like 3 minutes before I have to go through the curtain. I'm like, I don't know. So my very first name ever was Dynamite. And it only lasted one show. And then Angel actually gave me the name Jade. It was her first wrestling name, and it also happened to be her daughter's middle name. And she gave that to me as my wrestling name. And I wrestled as Jade for years, and then, you know, more women wrestlers started to pop up, and the name became quite popular. So there were other girls using it, so I was like, I'm just going to get rid of it. And I wanted to change the name, and you know, and again, not thinking, I'd said to a promoter, I had a show coming up, and I said, you know, I want to change my name, you know, before the show, so don't put Luscious, you know, or don't put Jade down. And he's like making the poster up, and he calls me, he's like, "Yeah, I'm making the poster now. I need the new name now." And my best friend at the time, Sean, was standing next to me. I'm like, and I looked at him, I was like, "I need a new wrestling name." And literally, he just blurted out Luscious Lily, and I just went, "Okay, Luscious Lily," and that was it. And then I had to change it again because I was Luscious Lily for a while, and then I every now and again I'll Google myself just to see what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds very narcissistic, but I do it. I think everybody does it in this business. But and I Googled it, and here there was a girl doing amateur porn under the name Luscious Lily to like put herself through college. And I was like, well, that's a pretty, good reason to be doing that. I was like, well, she can have the name. And it was, the internet's become more prevalent. People can find out your real name. So at that point, I was like, whatever, let's just use my real name.
Wow. You also trained.
Oh my God! Where did you find that picture?
I found it on Tumblr earlier. Because I was looking for stuff on Angel, and I'm like, is she still active? And I came across that picture, and I'm like, oh my God.
I haven't seen that picture. For those of you in the chat room, she obviously put a picture. I haven't seen that picture in forever.
Yeah, I think it's from some show in New Jersey.
Oh, it's definitely a show in New Jersey. I know exactly what show that was on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that old picture. Wow, what a flashback.
That is, wow. That's when my hair was bleached blonde. Oh, my God. Talk about shocking.
Yeah. Wow. You also trained at the IWA Cruel School, where the hit trainer was Rapid Fire Maldonado.
Yeah.
How was the training process there?
I loved it. I'd worked shows for a while, like a couple of years, and I started working for LAW in Philly, which was a company run by Chubby Dudley from ECW, and I was just managing at the time. What had happened was I had done a show for Triple WA. I was managing on a show. Dino Santa got nervous or upset about something that was going on, I don't know, and he sent guys to do a run-in that we didn't know were coming. One of the guys grabbed me and went to hit a move, didn't call it. I didn't know what was going on. I ended up falling. I ended up landing on my knee. I ended up fracturing my knee.
Oof.
Yeah, it was, and your first big injury is always scary, but the way it happened, like this guy came running out. I had no idea what was going on. Hit me with a move, I'm trying to dead weight him, but at the time I was much skinnier than I am now. And, so he just picked me up with ease and drops me here. I land on my knee and fracture my knee. So, it kind of shook me, and I was like, I don't want to wrestle anymore. Like, that hurts. I don't want to do that anymore.